Welcome to The Riff, where writer and investor Bern Hobart and I discuss the major inflection points caused by technological change. Our weekly conversation covers the obvious and not so obvious ways in which markets and businesses will adapt as a result. Let's jump right in. Hey everyone, Eric here. This week, instead of the usual conversation between Bern and me, we're releasing a conversation I had with Patrick McKenzie for Patrick's show Complex Systems. We discuss all things tech journalism, from movies to Twitter to public intellectuals. If you like the usual episodes of The Riff, there's a good chance you'll enjoy hearing from Patrick as well. Please enjoy.
Well, Patrick, it's great to be back and turn the tables again and interview you again. People love the first time.
Thanks very much for having me, or thanks very much me for having you. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's start by getting into the piece that you most recently published, Fiction and Finance, and maybe zoom out. Is your mental model of fiction the quote, all models are wrong, some are useful? Is that, how do you think about it?
I love that quote. I definitely don't think that is true of all of fiction, and specifically not in the way that I intended that essay. But I think fiction, games, other things that strike us as trivial or unreal are, in fact, good pedagogical devices, and they're also good advocacy devices if you either intend to use them that way and execute well on that, or sometimes by accident. And the accidents happen. Like Michael Lewis at least professes that Liar's Poker was not a sales pitch to get people to join the financial industry as traders, but it nonetheless was a very effective sales pitch over the years. People have told him, have told me, and have told various and sundry that, that this notion of like being what seems to be high testosterone swaggering bros with high risk tolerances sounds like a wonderful life to lead, particularly if it leads to debauchery, and thus I joined the financial industry. That definitely isn't the only narrative that causes people to join the financial industry, but it is one that comes up for at least some folks. And the parallel I draw in the piece is to the film The Social Network. Bern has an excellent essay on how The Social Network might be descriptively the most important movie of all time, simply because of how much human capital it helped to reallocate from places like the financial industry to places like the software startup founding track, where there are sort of objectively verifiable indicia that the social network happened, and then there was a step change in YC applications that hasn't gone down after that. Another objectively verifiable indicia that is more difficult to find publicly is founders will straight up tell you, I thought I was going to go get a job at Google or whatever, and then I watched The Social Network, and that sounded much more fun than configuring XML files for the next 10 years, so I decided to do that instead, and now I'm a billionaire. One can imagine how many chats and who the speakers of those would be, but the price of learning some stories is you don't get to repeat them. The sort of broader point there is that The Social Network is not a true story. It's based in reality, but heavily fictionalized. I can only imagine like how enraging it must be for someone like Mark Zuckerberg to see themselves presented on screen, and on the one hand, see some things which are like pretty objectively well executed elements of pastiche or impersonation or whatever you want to call it. And then it's like, oh, and your wife was totally rewritten, and because she is not considered a major character in the story by the authors of it, whereas you, the actual author of your life, probably would have like given her a couple of words in the narrative. But be that as it may, it's a very fictionalized thing. So there are characters that come out of left field. The procedural history doesn't track the actual procedural history in life that gets recounted in lawsuits and whatever. It's sexed up massively. And yet, like a lot of people saw The Social Network and was like, I kind of like that. And to use like a little bit of personal history here, before I got married to my wife, her circle of girlfriends who, for those of you who don't know me, Ruriko, my wife, is a Japanese woman. Her circle of girlfriends who grew up in central Japan are, for various cultural reasons, not maximally disposed to one of the member of the circle dating an entrepreneur, because they think that is one step above homeless vagabond. And the circle of girlfriends attempted to stage an intervention on the topic of marrying me, not simply because I was a foreigner. I was already a check in the wrong column, but because I was running a little software business over the internet, and shouldn't she be able to land a salaryman somewhere? I was an ex-salaryman at that point, and pretty firmly ex, although I kept options open if it was necessary to convince her mother. But then The Social Network came out. They were like, oh, he might not just be like running a software business, like we thought he was running a software business, whatever I thought was on that. He might be running one of those like Mark Zuckerberg-y kind of software businesses. I don't know. but that's the kind that gets a movie made of you. And that would be cool if like one of our friends' husbands had a movie made of him. So we approve. All right. And so, this sounds like a trivial thing, and it's very not a trivial thing for me. That the life satisfaction of my wife is like a very high goal. And when I talk to entrepreneurs and proto-entrepreneurs and people who are considering quitting their jobs in Japan all the time, one of the most salient things for very many of them was this question of, I have other stakeholders in life. I have my parents to think of. I have my significant other to think of. I want to do this, but they don't want this for me. And if they don't want this for me, I can't do it. And that is a recurrent enough factor over there. And now I'm getting a bit off topic, but it's a recurrent enough factor over there that some of the smartest firms that are hiring for startup employees in Japan like have a business process of a periodic reporting but not endorsing. It's for the wives and girlfriends, like a periodic meeting for prospective wives and girlfriends, actual wives and girlfriends of prospective employees, to give them a pitch on like working for a startup is not a one-way ticket to homeless vagabondville for the man in your life. And so this is like a construction of reality, which reflects in some distorted mirror sense the actual reality of working in our industry. And that construction is actually useful. And I think we've mutually noticed over the last couple of years that the construction of reality in the tech industry and how our story is told by people who are in it and people who are maybe attached to it but not quite in it, and then people who find themselves in opposition to it, might be like looking through a glass darkly at the actual reality of it in ways that occasionally causes me to lose even more of my hair than I already have. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about the tech-flavored media, which is a subject that has come up a time or two on this podcast with Kelsey Piper, among others. But and this kind of like emergent internet native sort of media that we find ourselves, well, you quite intentionally, me perhaps a little bit more accidentally creating.
Well, yes. And one thing I just also want to point out, even about the example you picked, is that it's very illustrative of something broader, which is those movies, Social Network, but even I think the Michael Lewis movie about Wall Street.
Big Short.
Yeah, or Big Short. I think these were meant as, I'm not as sure as which Wall Street one, but I know they were as cautionary tales. Like they were meant to sort of make the industry not look great. Right. Zuckerberg famously didn't like a lot of the characterizations because they wanted him to seem like either a bad boy or, someone who was sexually frustrated or something. And in fact, he had found his college sweetheart early on. And, that was less of a complete narrative of the story they were trying to tell. So he didn't love it. At the same time, the impact of the movies had the reverse effect. They made the industries more sexy. And so Zuckerberg, there's this New Yorker profile where at first he's frustrated, and then he ends up taking the whole team to go see it. And it's just funny how sometimes the intent of the journalist or the media is to write a hit piece, and it ends up being a glorification.
I think it is almost literally impossible to make a movie in the way that we make movies and not have the protagonist of that movie come off as someone who a large portion of the audience wants to emulate. Like people sometimes complain about media literacy and folks who watch Breaking Bad and end up wanting to be like Heisenberg. It's like, well, I don't know if that's entirely like a media literacy problem, unless the literacy problem is like in the media itself. It's, we have this vast industrial complex, which is very literally designed to make people look attractive to the audience. Like huge amounts of human effort are dumped into that in every shot, in every frame. In every like interview about the production and all of the meta commentary around it. And then we are shocked that people might like actually, feel some sense of relationship with character or want to do that sort of thing, et cetera. And this is, not just confined to industries where there would be some like more controversy in real life, but War Dogs, for example, sensationalizes the prospect of being like medium to low competence gun runners. And if you come away from that movie thinking, I absolutely would not want to be a medium to low competence gun runner, like maybe you're in 5 to 10% of the audience, but like it does what a movie that stars rich and attractive people is supposed to do, like entertains wildly for 2 hours and makes you think like, I don't want to become a mobster tomorrow, but like if I did, that would kind of be cooler than the life I'm actually living. And so I am frustrated with this genre of I didn't mean it that way.
Yeah, it's very funny. There's this meme on Twitter that is going around that I think speaks to this phenomenon of like the impact of the reader is opposite of what the writer intended. And the meme goes, I already support him. Stop trying to sell me. Yeah, after someone writes a hit piece. Yesterday, this was happening when someone was tweeting something like, Trump's secret plan is to get Elon Musk influence in the White House. And that's why, that's his nefarious plan. And if you like Elon Musk, then you're kind of excited about that plan, even though you didn't know that was a possibility.
I think that any serious charge that there is a conspiracy in action, which is moving multiple levers in concert to achieve a preferred policy outcome, always makes that conspiracy sound better than the real world.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if we were capable of moving multiple levers in concert to achieve any policy outcome, wow, that's an impressive capability to have. I'd like more of that, please. Which lever do I pull for that? So yeah, would generally suggest as just a messaging tactic, people not attribute vast power and likelihood of success to their things that they don't want to see win in the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's go back to the broader question, or I guess the question I'm proposing, which is why is tech journalism not great? I guess I'll go out on a limb and say that I'm not sure if you were necessarily saying that. And then that begs the question: was it ever great? At the very least, 15 years ago, it was more positive. And I would say that maybe there's some sort of tragedy of the commons here, where if you are, really interested in the technology and in business, you usually want to work in it in some capacity or influence it in some capacity. And maybe that means you want to build it. Maybe that means you want to invest in it. Maybe that means you want to research in it. But there are just far more lucrative and interesting positions within the industry.
And I think you can literally see that in people's LinkedIn and Twitter updates as evaporative cooling takes effect. And not to point fingers at anyone, but it's an example that is unambiguously positive in my regards. Kim McKenzie, excellent journalist.
Yeah.
She wrote the only thing that has ever been worthy of appearing on TechCrunch, an outlet I do not have a great deal of regard for, which was about the San Francisco Bay Area housing crisis. And it turns out that if you are capable of writing 600-page intensely researched cases for investment and malinvestment, you are inefficiently allocated as a journalist and should probably be a venture capitalist or other capital allocator instead. Pays much better, you get invited to better parties, et cetera, et cetera. And so she made the leap, and then TechCrunch loses the one person who has ever defaced it with journalism.
Totally. And the amount of venture capital jobs exploded over the past couple decades, which means that more of these writers can become venture capitalists. But then also there are some people who love to do it for the love of the game. The Ben Thompsons and the Benedict Evans of the world, and the Dort Keshes, the podcast space, et cetera. And more lucrative opportunities emerge for them too. The ability to go independent and build, in the case of Ben Thompson, a massive 8-figure plus subscription business, and so you don't need to work at a publication. And then I think the biggest thing is that social media just intermediated, where now journalists were always kind of the middlemen between expertise and the audience or the public, and then the experts can now share their thoughts directly with the public in a way that for some use cases obviated the need for a middleman, at least on the op-ed portion.
So before I go into more considered thoughts, I should give the obligatory disclaimer. I used to work in a tech company's PR department for a while. That was Stripe. Still an advisor at Stripe. Nothing that I say in my personal spaces is necessarily endorsed by Stripe. And this is the sort of topic that if you work in a PR department, you are anti-socialized to avoid touching for all the obvious reasons. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. And the relationship of PR departments and news organizations is not exactly a one of sustained cooperation in that fashion, but it's an iterated game, and you need to be worried about what you signal in the iterated game. Disclaimer out of the way. I think there's multiple factors here, and they kind of get fractally deep, but examining sort of one at a time, as it were. The rise of social media gave companies an interesting incentive with regards to their labor forces, where they started to realize it no longer matters from a hits an impact perspective, just that we decide to place something on the front page. There's this phenomenon called going viral. And as Facebook and then Twitter especially became much more important for the distribution, they started to notice that the things that quote unquote went viral, which was difficult to track in the early internet, were very attributable to a certain seed set of users on places like Twitter and similar. And they heavily encouraged their journalists to become dangerous at the act of like making their own stuff viral on Twitter, and said essentially, not that we pay you great amounts of money to work at legacy media institutions, but a de facto job expectation here is you are going to maintain a presence on Twitter where the rest of the industry, your sources, et cetera, are, and you're going to do your darndest to maintain and improve the reach of your work in the future. And we will show you a graph, and we will like award plums internally based on who does well on this graph. And I think they got what was coming to them on that decision, which is that 80% of the writers in legacy media have no following worth speaking of, largely because they don't write anything worth reading. And I think that's sort of a robust criticism, but find me someone who reads the media professionally and wouldn't agree with it. But for various partially like literally guild reasons, that's what the union is called, and internal fairness reasons and similar, there was a stark division internally on the basis of status for our star writers versus the people who merely, continue to allow us to publish the publication every day. But the like salary bands and similar were heavily compressed. Once it became possible for individuals to have a following which was unambiguous, because you can just look up somebody's follower account, because you can just see which of their last 5 articles like hit the top in trending sections or similar. You can like see the like counts, see the hit counts in some cases. You can verify the following. You can see that they're doing very well. The center cannot hold where the person who is, the most effective at their job, this axis, is getting paid like within a 20% band of a similarly tenured individual who, for whatever reason, is not hitting those same numbers. After the center cannot hold, there starts to become some very, very difficult negotiating terrain for the traditional media providers with regards to some of their superstars. And unfortunately, media is a very hits-driven business in like most niches of it. It is institutionally incredibly aware of this because they have the graphs, and yet institutionally has to pretend that no, like the New York Times is a brand and it has consistent brand standards, and one like standardized unit of New York Times content is exactly equivalent in like truth and institutional accuracy and stamp of approvalness as every other standardized unit of New York Times content, which is why we're able to charge like substantially similar advertising rates across all of it. Now, people who work in media advertising departments are like, well, actually, we all know that world news and style are two different like fiefdoms, and they get different advertising rates. But yeah, within style, sure, all style articles are the same to us, or we profess that to be true with regards to negotiating advertising rates. Anyhow, when you go out to superstar journalists, Ben Thompson, I don't know if he had a career in like professional journalism prior to becoming Ben Thompson, but the folks who have a differentiated opinion, who write really well, who are capable of doing their own PR, as it were, managing their social media following, surfing the zeitgeist, whatever you want to call that skill set, they should obviously capture superstar returns compared to the median entrant in the industry. That is difficult for the large media players to structurally offer them. And so the large media players don't. And thus, like a lot of the superstars have chosen exit over the years. And some of the proto-superstars have not chosen entry. I was asked a time or two if I wanted to like become a tech journalist because, hey, you enjoy tech, you're right. Why don't you do journalism? And my career planning is kind of boring, but like the high order bit on that question is I'd have to be insane. How about I take a 90% pay cut and also, by the way, like work for a publication that has less readers than I do, which, okay, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but not much of one with regards to like the marginal nth piece. that's part of it on like the internal compensation thing. I also think there was something of a race run on Twitter specifically in the sort of clade of people who work in journalism professionally, and then the subclade of people who work in tech journalism professionally.
Hey everybody, Eric here with a word from our sponsors. Our sponsor for today's episode is Carta, the end-to-end accounting platform that's purpose-built to power the strategic impact of the fund CFO. For the first time ever, private fund operators can now leverage their very own bespoke software that's designed from the ground up to bring their whole portfolio together, enabling formations, transactions, and distributions to flow seamlessly and accurately. The end result? A remarkably fast and precise platform that empowers better strategic decision-making and delivers transformational insights on demand, timely K1s, holistic fund performance data, and so much more. Come see the new standard in private fund management at carta.com/investors. That's carta.com/investors.
Now, all industries are very small places. Like the collection of people who work in the Tokyo startup ecosystem, it's not literally the case that they can all fit around a dinner table, but they've all had dinner with each other, and they all intend to have dinner with each other in the future. Like this is a community. Rumors carry. Your status within the community matters an incredible amount to you, et cetera, et cetera. Journalism is no different. And the community that is journalism largely descriptively exists in a few neighborhoods in New York. And there is the normal amount of like social pressure to, vote with your compatriots, both in the literal and figurative sense of vote, to be interested in the things that they are interested in, to, default believe hypotheses that they all default believe, and default be skeptical of hypotheses of which they are all default skeptical, to the phrase we use in Japan, not be the nail that sticks up because the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. Like that, I think, is a constant of almost all human cultures anywhere. And that culture, plus the existence of Twitter and the existence of the Twitter to Slack bridge within journalistic institutions, caused a hyperdrive into groupthink over the last couple of years, with some external influences that we can get into in a minute. But people who spend a little bit too much time on Twitter, I certainly spend a little bit too much time on Twitter. I absolutely will confess this about myself. Journalists were, in many cases, like professionally obligated to spend a little bit too much time on Twitter. You outsource a tremendous portion of your thinking to the glass rectangle in the palm of your hand, in particular to the first couple of replies that hit you when you post something to the glass rectangle in the palm of your hand. And if those replies are skeptical of the thing that you have just spent the last 2 weeks of your professional life on, you feel terrible. Even if, like, step back for a moment, does, like, trying to think of a Reddit-esque shitposter 9000 or whatever. Does shitposter 9000 like really someone who you want to outsource how you feel about your Monday to? Probably not, but you do anyhow, because that is like the nature of these products. They are designed to achieve that outcome. Kind of in a purpose of a system is what it is way. But like if Twitter did not succeed in greatly emotionally moving people, Twitter would not be Twitter. So the first couple of responders to someone who posts a journalistic article are often going to be like journalism people on the same beat, partly because they all mutually want to hitch their wagons to each other for professional reasons, partly because it's how you like show your bosses, yeah, I'm still engaged in it, partly because in some cases you genuinely want to support your friend and colleague's work, and partly because like the brute reason of, if you're like writing a trade press and the tech industry used to be covered as trade press and then became covered as a culture war issue, but that's neither here nor there. Back when it was like all trade press, trade rags are trade rags because the only people who want to read trade rags are either in the industry or writing about the industry. And so the people who most likely care about the N+1 article on a particular industry are people who write articles on that industry. Like that's just the nature of the beast. And so this feature where like you get positive feedback immediately if you say the thing that the marginal reporter would say about your situation, and you get visceral negative feedback immediately if you say the thing that the marginal reporter would say, oh, carrying water for the industry, caused a great deal of groupthink. And then there's the Twitter/Slack crossover, which I think has been heavily under-discussed in all of these. The Twitter Slack crossover happens when there is something that is happening on the open internet on Twitter. And coincidentally, there is something that is happening on the closed internet on Slack, typically within a particular large employer. The vast majority of these incidents are like the vast majority of things that happened to the world yesterday. They are below the waterline. We never see it. But we've seen a couple of them simply because the news media loves talking about itself. And so we can be aware of the part, the visible part of the iceberg by seeing that, for example, the New York Times has had several things which were both culture war controversies and also labor organizing, done maybe a little less formally than labor organizing historically is. And the specific format of that was essentially creating a coalition within the New York Times's newsroom that decided that it was going to post quite repetitive posts on Twitter in the support of a goal which was internally advocated for as a labor organizing goal. And the specific flavor text for that doesn't really matter. It happened to be something around the safety of our colleagues who are African American. Don't interrogate that goal too much. Like, it will break your brain. But the important thing is, like, this is not a conspiracy theory. There's a group of people who have effectively commandeered an office at their employer. And that office just happens to be a private message group on Slack. And they've said, like, as a considered strategy, we are going to take a break from reporting the news and engage in coordinated messaging via Twitter. We will then point to the coordinated messaging happening on Twitter as evidence to win an internal argument with regards to what this publication's policy should be. That happened. Things that are similar to that happened in many companies over the years. And, stories which are not mine to tell are not mine to tell. But I would like to point to people, like, if you are in the position of, like, having to design, I don't know, a large company's social media standards, like, look very carefully at what happened to the New York Times that time, and consider what a small and very motivated group of employees could do if they decided to cause a combined Twitter/Slack event at your company. I don't know any company that has ever suffered a combined Twitter/Slack event and thought, oh, thank goodness. We were going to, like, just step on a landmine managerially. But when several hundred of our employees, like, did a coordinated labor action and brought us into disrepute on Twitter, that totally maximized for our values. Yeah. Anyhow, so this sort of, like, the evaporative cooling of people who capitalism decided would be better used if they were in better jobs, and the sort of hothouse of the people remaining in journalism caused this sort of bifurcation in the industry, I think. I also think that nobody's community is completely immune to things happening in the external world. The media and security state mutually talked each other into believing, in the wake of a presidential election, that the presidential election had been stolen. Now, these days, it's much more popular to say that presidential elections never get stolen in the United States. But those of us who are older than the age of 5 or so might remember a time where that was a very live conversation. And the theory for this was that, like, Russian intelligence engaging with a British consultancy dropped 6 figures or so of AdWords spend or Facebook ad spend probably onto the election, and thus it was stolen. And this was very passionately believed by a lot of people who were feeling pretty bad when their favorite candidate lost a presidential election. Happens to half the population every 4 years, but these folks, for whatever reason, felt like it should never have happened to them, at least not to this guy. And so they went looking for reasons, and they created a reason, and that reason had very little entanglement with the actual world we live in. But having discovered who their bad guy was, some combination of Russia and Facebook, and being unable to do much from their platform to make Russia's life miserable, they decided very, very overtly to make Facebook's life miserable for a couple of years. And then kind of used that reporting template to color a lot of their coverage on the tech industry, which previously had been some mix of like, here's the cool new thing you can do on your phone, and trade rag press. And I say trade rag because trade rag is the term of art for an industry-focused press. Like this is traditionally said in somewhat of a sneering fashion by high-status publications with regards to their relatively low-status brethren who are covering, what is new and exciting with regards to food sanitation equipment quarterly. But like trade presses, they need to exist in the world. All industries need some coordination mechanism, which is larger than like an individual firm, but not as directly aligned as a industrial association is. And they provide some value. And they also, like, bluntly, they provide an obvious place for industry to create a selling point to like do things like have trade events, conduct hiring of people, have a messaging platform for device manufacturers of America want to get their message out to the wider world. The trade rag is a way for them to like test that message against each other before they send it out to their lobbyists and try to get in the halls of power in Washington. And so, to make a long story short, like the previous dispensation with regards to tech reporting, where tech was covered like every other industry, was probably sustainable, probably would have been great. And we're no longer in that mode. We have, conspiracy theory doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Like there is as reported by Maddie Iglesias, and then confirmed by a number of people with knowledge of the situation, the New York Times had a narrative setting from top down, which said that essentially when we're reporting on the tech industry, we're going to find the maximally skeptical take on any given story to hold the tech industry into account for their exercise of power and similar. I think media's take that it necessarily holds powerful actors to account is very important to their self-conception and might or might not match facts on the ground always. That is certainly not the way that people who are, in the Washington sphere report on politics. Like sometimes their report on politics says, well, this is like self-evidently an important story. There's a hurricane happening right now. The government is responding to the hurricane. We would be derelict in our duties if we did not report what the government was saying right now. Sometimes it's a human interest story. They become close to their sources, like people become close to anyone they spend a lot of time with or go out to dinner with. And then, some portion of it is holding the industry to account. But holding the industry to account is not the only reason to like observe a company acting within capitalism and report on their movements. Some of those movements are kind of important, like the if you are reporting on automobile manufacturers and the only thing you ever report on is car accidents, you're doing a pretty shitty job of reporting on like the impact of automobiles on human civilization. There is a wider context that you need to reflect, and we have retreated from that wider context intentionally, which is causing a bit of a reaction within the tech industry, partially gnashing of teeth for a few years, and then after it reached a certain crescendo, I think there have been more directed action than teeth gnashing.
Yeah, I spoke to one of the journalists I admire the most at The Information, and one of the things they said that they care most about is holding tech companies accountable. And The Information is supposed to be the trade, media publication, but who is served by keeping tech companies accountable? Not the tech companies themselves. So it's not trade media if you don't serve the people in the industry, you don't help them get better at their jobs. But to your point, there's this kind of adverse selection because people are getting 90% less compensation to be a journalist. Either you can't get a better job, or you're ideologically motivated, i.e., you want to hold people or companies accountable. And on the other side, the people go for it.
Minorly frustrated in that if you strictly think like your job is holding someone accountable to some higher standard, you should probably be a regulator, and you should probably have the democratic process backstopping the decisions you are making on a day-to-day basis. Like otherwise, you're
yeah.
like, who picked you, bub? And like a bit of the who picked you, bub is leaking into the decisions by the tech industry, where historically, like the who picked you is similar to the tech companies, like finding themselves in a position of power because they created, among other things, habits that allowed them to sell large amounts of advertising. Historically, the who picked you for the media There's a bit of state involvement in there, but the biggest part is that they convinced the entirety of the middle class to accept a physical artifact at their door every day that was wrapped in advertising, and the trade such that it was between the people who were the subject of news stories and the newspapers was, we are a way for you to get your message out to the entirety of the middle class at once. And you keep giving us things that the middle class will find interesting, and we will continue to be able to sell advertising. And when you say it that way, it sounds a little bit sordid. It's not intrinsically more sordid than any other ad-supported industry or any other industry for that matter. Like, the news media is a business. But as that business model broke down and became less culturally accepted in the culture that was journalism, to offer a quid pro quo to the companies that were continuing to bring them the feedstock that they would turn into advertising inventory, there's wait, we had a deal. The deal isn't contractualized anywhere, but this is an iterated game with a handshake to it. And if you're not going to keep up your end of the deal, why am I talking to you again? And so this gets back to we should build and own our own platforms things. The entire middle class was habituated into accepting a printed artifact that was produced at enormous expense and logistical effort and dropped on their doorstep every day. That is not the way. That is not the primary habit of the middle class, the entire middle class anymore. The primary habit is taking out the device in their pocket and accessing the internet, which, whoops, we didn't expect to do that, but we did. And so tech companies have decided, hey, if the goal is getting to as many people through an internet platform that we control, and the media's core advantage there is simply a legacy user base, which is dwindling every year, and some amount of skill at what it takes to produce the media. Let's just replicate the skill bits and control our own platform, and then we will renegotiate with ourselves how much of the coverage of our industry should be punching ourselves in the face. And go figure, when you ask the tech industry that question, it is not 100% of it.
It's very funny. And I also want to get into going back to the tragedy of commons, because most people now work in the industry. They don't share their knowledge, or they don't share their research to the extent that they could. If they were analyzing a company previously on behalf of a media outlet, now they're doing it for a venture firm. That venture firm wants them to keep their analysis internally so they can trade on it, right? And so as a result, there's just not a ton of amazing public analysis, although there's starting to be more, because people are understanding the benefits of sharing your knowledge, so that you could have demonstrated expertise in some capacity and recruit, and all the sorts of benefits of having a media brand like you have. And that's what we're trying to capitalize on at Turpentine, which is experts who work in the industry, have the knowledge, and maybe as an exhaust of them doing their jobs of creating this knowledge, they can become creators or educators or share their knowledge publicly. And we're trying to make it easy for them to do so, first in podcast form, but then later on hopefully in written form as well, because there's a dearth of great content.
Mm-hmm. I like to think of it as something like public intellectualism, where the production function that is universities has any number of issues associated with it. But one of the relatively nice parts of that production function is as a necessary prerequisite for you climbing the ladder in universities and getting yourself on the frontier of human knowledge, you will contribute the things you learn at the frontier of human knowledge to the commons in a way which is very visible and legible to the other people in your field directly, but for some subset of university professors, Tyler Cohen's and similar of the world, they make an extra special effort to not merely keep that conversation within the walls of the ivory tower, but rather to let the rest of polite society in on it. That's not as simple as saying oh, we hang and anybody is willing to enter, sign in the store, and then it's done for the day. Writing is a lot of work. Writing well is a skill. Relatively few people will optimize their lives over a 20-year period for having it. So one of the things to be pretty happy about in the tech industry's take on this is that there are a number of people who, for whatever combination of professional incentives or psychological damage from when they were children, in my case, I don't know, decide to spend like many, many thousands of hours writing about things and then publishing them to the internet. And that since sort of like the default way for publishing things is like less gatekeepered, less institutionally controlled than it is in a lot of fashions in more traditional industries, in the journalism industry and similar, I think you'd have higher variance with respect to the artifacts that actually make it to the internet versus artifacts that go through a more controlled channel. And higher variance means like more of the good stuff, perhaps more of the bad stuff too. But due to the wonder and terror that is distribution on the internet, you are more likely to encounter the good stuff than the bad stuff, as long as you have not completely, outsourced your media diet to whatever is trending on your social platform of choice. Which, by the way, there are some true knocks against the tech industry, and one of them is that if you know nothing about a user and you are optimizing for engagement, like there are relatively simple ways to create like a top stories that are most likely to engage the user today feature that many of your people will adopt, because like the other way of managing their own feeds is very, very time and effort intensive. And the sort of things that people will get when they consume that feature are going to be pretty terrible. And you can see this on I don't know what it's called in English because I keep all my devices in Japanese for old time's sake. But there's the people you're following on Twitter page, and then there's the other one, for you or whatever it's called, recommendeds. And the composition of that has changed a little bit under new Twitter management, but it hasn't changed radically. It was a pretty awful place before, and it is a pretty awful place now relative to following people that you actually want to invite into your life on a regular basis. Anyhow, more choices is generally speaking good in the world. There are existing public intellectuals in the tech industry who have track records and some level of the artifact is the artifact. You can just look at it and say, is that good or not? Do I want to invite more like this in my life or not? And then like very, cheaply subscribe to the old internet phrase is like, I would like to, I like your ideas and would like to subscribe to your newsletter. And now that it's actually a business model these days, which props to the Substack team. But be that as it may, the leading lights in the tech industry that choose to be public intellectuals. And by the way, if you were to sort by smartest people in the tech industry or people who have the most interesting ideas and then intersect with who has an actively maintained, say, blog as of this week, those are not completely overlapping sets. Just like any other industry, the vast majority of the intellectual effort will be forever below the waterline. It's going to be in investment memos and in presentations to the board and in the day-to-day work of running the world, because the tech industry kind of runs a lot of the world these days. But when you look at like public intellectuals in the tech industry, I think we do pretty well with regards to some of them. And, when I look at public intellectuals across industries broadly, it's like, okay, with regards to things that like specifically implicate the tech industry, I think the industry tends to run the table on all commentary with regards to the industry. There is not an easily accessible source of journalism or public investing commentary that is a better way to learn about the tech industry than the usual suspects. But, not that it's a contest or anything, but if you look at intellectual heavyweights in the sphere of creating public goods for humanity, if you were to come up with a list of like 100 people in the world or 100 Americans and, write down that list of like, who are those best writers? And it included 0 people from the tech industry. I kind of like doubt the way that your ranking function has worked. So, not to talk us up too much, the industry broadly, obviously not the parties in the present conversation.
Right. Well, speaking of lists for a second, it's just circle back to earlier conversation. It's just funny, Time had a list of like top 100 people in AI, and Elon Musk didn't make the list, but Scott Wiener did, or Scarlett Johansson did, and it just showed like.
Yeah, this is one of those people do not appreciate the media's production function anymore. One, like any list of list of topics is someone wanted something that was relatively cheap to produce, but like sustains a lot of attention on the internet and will sell a lot of ads. Two, like Time, specifically Newsweek, et cetera, have been bought out by effectively like private equity firms, and they wear those brands as skin suits, but they are not the journalism operations that contributed to the prestige that we associate with Time and Newsweek. And so, like, I wait. Here are the top 100 people, in Field X by Forbes or Time about as highly as I wait. Here are the top 100 people on bobsblog.wordpress.com. This is internet ephemera, not really worth much time and attention, but because humans are social creatures and everyone likes to be ranked against people, those continue to be great ways to gain time and attention. I'd also say, like, if one wanted to be maximally cynical and you were writing a list of the top 100 people and you wanted that to spread the most, you should obviously knock out some of the names that should be on the list, just so that people say, but hey, wait, what about Elon Musk, for example? Because that will get people talking about your piece. And not saying that journalism is maximally cynical, but they're not stupid either. And this is like any product, this product is evolved by competitive pressures and also by like the explicit theory of the mind that the producers have of the product of what the job is to be done that their users want. And so, like, that is an important thing to remember when consuming journalism, regardless of whether it is produced by a truly well-credentialed institution, such as, I don't know, the New York Times, or by a PE firm, which is wearing an legacy media institution as a skin suit.
Right. Yeah, no, 100%. The type of media I'm interested in creating or producing for others to create is basically information that helps people get better at their jobs. I think Lenny Wachitsky and you and many others have done a really great job at helping people have a better sense for what it looks on the inside to run or work at these companies and how to solve for tactical problems. I'm also interested in on even just like the company analysis side. If you take a company like Replit, and if you said, hey, I want to have a sense for how Replit makes money, or how the latest product that they shipped, how's it doing, or what do people think about it, or what is sort of the state of the business, how does it compare to competitors? I wouldn't know necessarily where to go for that. Sometimes people have hot takes on Twitter. The memos, as you alluded to, are in private where people do that work. But I think we should have a public repository of companies that matter, that are interesting. We should track them, and sometimes the information will have like, oh, scale has increased revenue or something, but more of the details of how they actually operate. So I hope to do a little bit of that research as well.
I like to pull back the curtain a little bit on the operations of the tech industry. I think that is both instrumentally useful and kind of morally important for us to do. The vast majority of the people in the world will not get the opportunity to work at a tech company in their lives. And of the people we want to reach, most, unless they are extremely socially advantaged, will never get the inside view of a tech company. They will never have someone sit them down and say, here's what sitting around the table at a pre-launch meeting looks like. Here are the, even people who are extremely professionally invested in holding tech accountable, whatever that means, don't understand how tech companies operate on a nuts and bolts level. And that is an extremely important thing to understand if you want to appreciate tech's impact on the world and how to influence that impact. And so, how does big tech make decisions on a nuts and bolts basis? Like, who is in the room? What positions in the company really matter? When you say, quote unquote, Google, you're failing at Kremlinology if you think that Google is one institution that has unitary command and control. Much like you are failing at Kremlinology if you say the Kremlin is a single institution that has unified command and control. And so we should have an appropriate amount of understanding of how that sausage is made, just like we try to have an appropriate amount of understanding of how the sausage is made in, for example, Washington. I think that democratic access of the constituents to the government that serves them is enormously morally important. And to the extent that one is worried about the amount of power that tech has accrued in the world, making that power more legible to the people that are impacted by it seems like a morally important point. And then, we have an ongoing discussion about how power is exercised in places like Washington. We have, an enormous reporting apparatus that doesn't merely consider throwing stones, but rather actually reporting how the world works to be part of the job. And we have, like some amount of fictional, the West Wing and similar of like, okay, you'll probably never get invited to a cabinet meeting, but here are the players. And by the way, they have staff around them. And it's extremely important to understand in the beast that is Washington, to understand that staff are making a lot of the decisions. And let's follow some of those staff around. That, like West Wing, all models are wrong. Some models are useful. Like, I assume that people who have worked in the White House would not say that West Wing is a fully accurate representation of how policymaking is done in the United States of America. I would also assume that they think like it's a lot better of a representation than what you will get out if you simply graduate high school with a typical American civics education. And I'll also think that like many of them will say, okay, it's fictionalized. Got to make good television out of it. But I'm totally in Washington because of West Wing. That was amazing. I wanted to be like that when I grew up. And I think, producing that for tech is important. This industry isn't going anywhere. We need to recruit hundreds of thousands and millions of talented young people over the next 10 years. And that requires telling them true things. Like this is an industry largely of talented, ethical people who understand these issues that get thrown in our face about governance and similar, who understand that we are doing extremely important work. We want you to help on the really important work. And this is not like the caricature. It isn't a bunch of billionaires in a smoke-filled back room who are, monopolistically determining the fate of the planet. It isn't the drug-fueled bonanza depicted in Social Network. There's only a few other narratives out there.
Emily Chang wrote this book, Brotopia. It's, sort of making it seem like, Silicon Valley is, having these, insane, crazy parties like it's Hollywood or something. Believe me, it would be cool if they were, but they're not.
I was once asked in apparent seriousness by somebody, what was the, given that I am a somewhat insider after being an outsider in the tech industry, like what the average rate per week was of drug and sex fueled orgies. And I don't know what kind of meetings you have been hanging out with, but like, a good discussion around the campfire of the virtues and deficits of the book Seeing Like a State is much more likely than the other stuff. And honestly, never been around the other stuff. I don't know that the rate is any higher than it would be for the culture/location that is the San Francisco Bay Area, but not my scene.
I doubt it.
Yeah. Be that as it may, we're relatively regular people. We were not bitten by radioactive spiders. That's another thing too. Like the tech industry has many very smart people in it, obviously. All places in American life where things get done on massive world-altering scale. I say American life because I'm American. I will out to this country, obviously, but everywhere in the tech industry, although the tech industry is descriptively largely an American institution in the way that most people use the term. Not true of semiconductors anymore, to the enduring annoyance of many, be that as it may. There are many smart people here. We are not a blessed anointed elite. Most of us do not inherit this job from our forefathers. Nobody ends up being a tech billionaire because your granddad was a tech billionaire, because, do the math, it's just the timelines don't work. And that is one of the other things to tell people, right? Hey, as someone who had a bit of the imposter syndrome going on, certainly during my university and early job seeking years, and probably 2 times much more recent than that, like telling people, you might not think that you're exactly Google material. One, if you're capable of appreciating the question, are you Google material or not? Like, you're probably already in the ballpark. 2, like, Google and tech companies broadly, they hire smart, accomplished, high-energy folks. Like many places in capitalism, hire smart, accomplished, high-energy folks. Like there is very likely a place for you here. Certainly don't take yourself out of the running for it. Since this frustrates me enormously that the people who have self-appointed themselves to tell the story of the industry want to tell everyone that no individual of good moral conscience would consider working for these folks, or there are more sophisticated ways to lodge that critique. Like, a more sophisticated way is, I saw the best brains of my generation do nothing but accomplish the goal of serving ads to users. That's a slightly more sophisticated technique criticism than no value has been created by the tech industry, which is obviously idiotic, and we should say so. But like, that slightly more sophisticated criticism is not true. Like, you could level a criticism at this is a bit of too quoque, but you could level a criticism at the, I don't know, institution that is the U.S. government, to say, I saw the brightest brains from my generation go into spending their entire career trying to kill the brightest brains of someone else's generation in the military-industrial complex. And like, that's descriptively accurate for the job of the military-industrial complex. That's a relatively small portion of the operations of the government. It's also like a relatively small portion of the ethical calculus of having a military-industrial complex. Like, if you were to grapple with the ethical dimensions of that, and there are people who professionally grapple with the ethical dimensions of that, like, you would hope not to dismiss it with like that one sentence summary. For the people who purport to grapple with the ethical dimensions of the tech industry, simply dismissing it with the one sentence summary is overly reductive and doesn't lead the audience to truth.
Yeah.
Which is a plausible end goal.
Right.
The journalism industry used to be like quite attached to that one. Perhaps we could return to our awesome traditions.
Yes.
So, Eric, thanks for coming on today and discussing a little bit of this funny world where the tech industry is telling its own story, and where there are interesting publications springing up to fill this void for more informed commentary on the companies, people, and ethical considerations that are inherent to it.
It was a great conversation. Thanks for having me.
And I'll see the rest of you next week. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to The Riff. Please go follow and subscribe, give us 5 stars, and check out Burn's excellent newsletter, The Diff, if you haven't already.